Hi, I'm Kelly O'Keefe from the Brand Federation. We're an organization that works with companies and colleges to help with critical brand challenges. And we were engaged to help Thomas Nelson Community College and their task force to navigate a new name change. I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about the process that the task force went through, and we'll tell you just a little bit about naming for colleges and related institutions. First, it's important to know that naming is both an art and a science. There's certainly a science to the way that we create names, trademark them, and make them useful in the public, but there's also an art to it. You'll see that in the use of trademarks and brands that are very powerful. For example, Pepsi and Coke are both incredibly valuable brands. They're brands that I'm sure you know well, and everyone that you know knows well. And yet the words themselves that support these brands probably don't mean a lot to you. If you think about it, you may not know what Pepsi ever meant or stood for, or what Coke means or stands for. It's not the meaning of the word that drives the value of brands. It's often the connections that the brand makes, both in the words and marketing that they use and in the actions that they take. Two examples in high technology that are a little bit more recent than Pepsi and Coke are Apple and Google. Both of these brands are multi-billion-dollar brands. Apple is the most valuable company on earth, and Google is not far behind. Both of them represent high technology, but once again, the words are not the reason those brands are strong. Apple is named for a piece of fruit, and it probably seems counterintuitive if you think about naming a high technology company a peach or a pear or an apple. And Google, well, I'm not sure what that means. It's what we call an abstract word, completely invented to suit Google. But both of those are very strong, very valuable, very powerful brands. That's because there's more to branding than the word that we build a brand on. A name and a logo by themselves don't make a brand. There are many things that drive the value of a brand, from emails to the signage you see on buildings, to the environments you go into, the advertising, public relations, presentations and speeches that come from it. But also in the case of higher education, what builds a brand most is the way that they deliver the teaching that they're intended to deliver. It's the great work that is done by Thomas Nelson Community College to elevate the knowledge of the students that seek an education there, and to elevate the community that it supports on the Virginia Peninsula that has made that college so powerful, not the name. And that's typical with most brands. After we have a name, we can start to tell a bigger story. For example, if we think about Whole Foods may not mean much to you, but then we take the name and we turn it into a logo, in this case, a logo that hints at fresh fruit or vegetables. We also add a descriptor, which tells us the category it's in this case, market. So we now know it's a marketplace. And then we add a tagline, which is usually a way to tell a little bit more of the story. In this case, America's healthiest grocery store. And then finally, everywhere a logo appears, there's a bigger story connected to it. So in this case, the story, the highest standards weren't available, so we created them, is part of the marketing of this particular brand. When you look at a name and a brand in context, we always see it with a story wrapped around it. And that's why it can be very challenging to evaluate names when you've seen them for the first time, because the words themselves may not be as meaningful as they will become once they're connected to a logo, a slogan, storytelling, videos, and everything else that goes along with a great brand. Think about an educational brand. If you just look at the word rice, well, your first thought is a grain that maybe you eat from time to time and a core part of Asian food. It's only when I tell you Rice University that you may recall that this is actually one of the most respected universities in the United States. It's a great educational brand. It's connected to great teaching. and thousands, if not millions of alumni who've learned at a great school. But the word itself is not what drives the reputation. It's always more in the world of educational brands. If we think back to some of the best educational brands, from Xavier University to Howard to Washington University, Princeton, Spelman College, all of these are great brands. All of these are respected colleges. All of them transform the lives of those who are in their charge. All of them have caring faculty, and they have supportive communities. But the words themselves would be meaningless without the work that they do to give meaning to those words. Xavier, Carnegie, Dartmouth, even Harvard. How many of us actually know what that word came from and who it stands for? What it stands for now is a college. So another thing that we have to think about when we're thinking about brands for a college is that it's very different from the way we think about brands in the consumer world. Consumer brands like Tide are really pitching us to try them, to buy them, and they're built around the value they deliver. Cleaner clothes, for example. And in many cases, the brands we use as a consumer, we don't even know who is behind those brands. Some of you may know that Tide is made by Procter & Gamble, but many of you don't. And if you drink Lipton iced tea, or you use Hellmann's mayonnaise, or you use Axe body spray, or Dove products, soap and other shampoo-like products, probably most of you don't know that all of those come from a company called Unilever. Because with product brands, the most important brand is just the brand on the product, not who's behind that brand. But it's different when we go to an organizational brand like a college. Here, we don't want to just get you to try. We want you to believe that this organization is doing the right things. And they're really built more around values than around value. Here, we know who's behind the organization because it's right on the name. And so our challenge with the task force was to help find a name that was aligned with the values and aspirations of the college, something that could allow us to tell the stories of the college around it. So the process that the task force took was to first become established at the direction of the board and the president. And the task force was comprised of students, faculty, staff, board members, administrators, and others who represented the views of the college and the college community. It's always important to have people most closely connected to the college represented, from the students to the faculty and everyone else. And fortunately, we had a variety of backgrounds, racially, ethnically, from a heritage, age, gender point of view, so that it was a really diverse group, young and old, student and board member coming together to think through how to create the best possible name for the school. And that task force was challenged with a number of things to make sure that they got the work right. First was to be objective, to check their own personal opinions at the door. And I expect anyone who's looking at this and thinking about the names that were created through that task force process to bring objectivity to it. It may not be the name that's your favorite name that works best for the college. We have to kind of step back with our personal opinions and bring objectivity. And I was so impressed that the task force did that. Second is inclusivity, to make sure that they reflected the point of view of everyone in the community. This was an effort to make sure that everyone's voice who wished to be heard was heard. They had to work with responsibility, knowing that they were creating a name that should last the college for another 50 years or beyond. And responsiveness. The work had to get done. The college can't be held up forever waiting in between two names. So they knew that they had to make decisions, and they had to make them quickly. And then finally, they had to consider the practicality of naming. A name that's too long could be difficult to put on a t-shirt or on a sign. A name that's difficult to pronounce could be challenging for students. So they had to think about the fact that the name had to have commercial value. It is a trademark, in fact, and it has to be very useful. And the task force went through 5 different sessions to work on these names. In the first session, they worked on setting the naming criteria, which I'll go through in just a moment, determining what a new name should bring about, what it should be built around. Then after that task force, in between, some additional names were generated based on that criteria, so that in task force 2, we could review a very long list of names to start to make some decisions about which names worked and which didn't. After the second session, some additional names were generated and community submitted names were added to the mix. And in session 3, that long list was started to be refined for trademark and community feedback. After that third session, they took the list of names that remained and they conducted a community survey. And we got a huge response to the community survey with people giving feedback on the names, which I'll go into in a moment. Then we took that community feedback and we did an additional name review in task force session 5, where we narrowed even further that list of names. And then after session 4, we did student roundtables, because the task force especially wanted to make sure that the voice of students were reflected in their decision-making. And so they wanted to see how students responded to the names that were brought together on the short list. And so we held student roundtables to get them that information. In the 5th and final task force meeting, we presented that information from all of the research, including the student roundtables, the survey, the town hall that we conducted it, and all of the feedback that had come on the website, which was open to 100% of the community to comment as they wished. All of the information was reviewed, and the task force made their final decisions to create a short list of 3 names to go through final trademark review, and then ultimately for the board to make their decision about a single name for the college to go forward with. They also considered things like, what were the names of other colleges, community colleges within the state? And they looked at examples like Blue Ridge College, Eastern Shore, Mountain Empire, New River, Piedmont, Tidewater, Virginia Highlands. Interestingly, almost all of those colleges are named after geographical features that are close to home to where the college operates. And this task force supported the views of the board and the views of the community in suggesting that the name should reflect the community and geography surrounding it. Now, that doesn't mean specific and exacting geographic terms alone, but terms that felt right for the place that this was located in. And you see that in some cases, we have very specific terms like Blue Ridge. And in other places, we have broader terms like Piedmont or Tidewater or Virginia Highlands. The specific criteria the task force developed to review their names based on was they didn't want any names that drew inspiration from an individual's name. They could see how that could become something that could potentially be outdated in the future. Instead, they wanted to reflect the unique geography of the service region. They also wanted something that had timeless relevance. In other words, not something that felt really fresh today, but would feel out of date a few years down the line. And they also wanted it to be something that could grow to welcome students, all students, regardless of their background, orientation, age, or academic goals. They wanted everyone to see this as a welcoming name and not a term that would offend any particular student population. They wanted to suggest an interconnectedness between the institution and its stakeholders, and of course, inspire the pursuit of a solid foundation and positive transformation. And from a technical point of view, there were a number of criteria that we looked at to make sure that the name could be trademarked appropriately. So a name that worked well as in English as a first language, but also would not be offensive in Spanish or other common languages, a name that is cleared for trademark use in US Patent and Trademark Office Class 35 and 41, which are the relevant trademark classes, We did common law searches because we didn't want another community college within Virginia to have the same name, obviously. And we avoided universities and colleges outside of Virginia that had identical naming. Now, that doesn't mean we have avoided all use of the name in any other category. And we looked at college databases. And then finally, we reviewed word type to create something that has an intuitive name, which just means a name that reflects characteristics that the school wants to reflect. After all of that technical work, a lot of work happened in the task force to review, from hundreds of potential names to community submitted names, to trademark searches, to multiple presentations and reviews of names. And they were guided by experts in the naming field who've named dozens of corporations and brands that you use on an everyday basis. When we conducted the survey, we got a really good response and a really diverse group, from students to alum, to college employees, donors, board members, former board members, advisory committee members, people at partner institutions, and community members. So a really diverse group of people submitted information, with the highest being people who worked for Thomas Nelson, which is great, because we want to make sure that people who work for the college were engaged in the process. And they came from a wide range of ages, genders, and ethnicities. And we ended up with 6 name finalists that were elevated by the research process, informing the task force, and ultimately the decisions about these 6 were made by the task force. And those 6 were Coastal Virginia, Harbor Bridge, Riverway, Virginia Peninsula, Virginia Harbor, and Two Rivers. With feedback from what students and others thought, we were able to narrow that list further. And the students really valued being part of that conversation. In fact, here's a quote from a student roundtable. "Thank you for letting us do this. This was very interesting. I'm glad personally that I at least had some input in this. So I'm looking forward to the outcome." And I really want to applaud again the task force members. They are all volunteer. They weren't paid for their work. And they really wanted to take into account the voice of students and the community in their decision-making. So that led the task force to select the top 3 named finalists I'm going to share with you now. And I'll share each one with just a little bit of information about why this made the list, either information shared by the task force or by someone in the research that we conducted. The first of those names is Virginia Peninsula. It's easy to say. It's certainly a very familiar name, since these terms have been associated with this community college for a long time through tagline and through other communications. It also happens that the community college serves the Virginia Peninsula. That is the technical name of the peninsula that is represented by the college. And so it's an accurate geographical term, and yet something that really feels right for the college. And here's something we heard about it. This is the one I came into the meeting liking the most. The college has been using the Peninsula's Community College as a tagline for a long time. So this one is easy for me to envision in a couple of years when I come across that stage to get my diploma. And when someone asks me, "Where did you go to college?" I can say it with pride that it was Peninsula Community College. Now, of course, it'll be Virginia Peninsula Community College, but some people are going to shorten it to Peninsula. We already know that, but it's my favorite. So I'm hoping this one works for you. The second name that was elevated by the task force after a review of research and commentary from students and others is Harbor Bridge. Now, Harbor Bridge hints at both the fact that the Hampton area is one of the largest natural harbors in the world, and that it's an area that is surrounded by bridges throughout. But it means a little bit more than that to members of the task force. The concept of harbor and a safe harbor has been related to education throughout the years. This is a safe harbor for people to come, to experiment, to learn, to grow, to fail, and to stand back up again. They also love the symbolism of the bridge, a bridge to the future, a bridge between different members of the community, and so many other positive associations of bridges. From the Pettus Bridge on, this is a term that they liked a lot. And here's a quote that we heard about this name. When I think about Harbor Bridge, and the same time I started to going to Thomas Nelson, it was a safe harbor for me. And it did bridge me to the next step in my life. The name is what touched me because that's what it was for me. Not only just being a student, but because Thomas Nelson Community College is a branch to the community, it does serve as a bridge. If we want to take a step further and we want to go back to our adolescents who are doing the dual college programs, that it's still connecting. It serves as a bridge to those individuals making their way through their paths. We're talking about unity with this particular college, and Thomas Nelson Community College has been one of those staple institutions that has connected not only students, but families, politicians, educators, et cetera, to one solid focus, a fulfilling purpose and pathways. We couldn't have said it better. Beautiful support for the second name, Harbor Bridge. The third name, Two Rivers, was created, inspired by, and this was suggested by many in the community, inspired by the York River and the James River, which surround the campus and surround the territory, making up the Virginia Peninsula. It also relates to symbolism, as you'll hear in this next quote. The name Two Rivers is pretty unique in that it clearly defines our region in a different way than Virginia Peninsula does. The uniqueness of it is that these two rivers come together and surround the peninsula, sort of implying that we have diversity and inclusion. And in the end, we have a unity of geographic or topographical feature. The significance of Two Rivers is that it leads to something bigger. It leads to a bay, and it leads out to the ocean. It leads to the world. There are a lot of things in the symbolism of Two Rivers that is totally brand new. Again, a really great take on what can be a really great and timeless name for this institution. So I'd like to close by saying that the task force focused a significant amount of time over the past several months to evaluate a wide variety of names and a great deal of research to make a wise decision. We think that all three of these names have great potential to be the new name for this storied college, and we look forward to seeing which name the board decides. Thank you.